All right, ready? All right, hi everybody. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting on October 10th. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. I'd take a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
All right, moved by Steven, seconded by Neil. Any discussion? Pretty solid agenda. All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, next on to the approval of the minutes from September 26th. Well, a motion to review them.
I'll make a motion.
All right, moved by Megan,
Second?
seconded by Neil, and discussion. I'm going to make my obligatory side note that someday I'm going to lobby the legislator to make that like a phrase that you can say that just says, okay, we're going to look at the minutes, because this gets tedious. Toss them out if you have any comments.
I had nothing in particular.
I didn't have any changes.
Yeah, I had no changes, just, it was good to review that. All right, all in favor of the minutes as written? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any disclosures relating to any potential conflicts of interest with agenda items tonight?
Nope.
Seeing none? Well then, open to the public, which we have tonight, so.
Public.
Yeah,
Good evening, my name is Andy Rowe, I'm with Rowe and Dickinson, and here tonight with me is Bob Miller, the landowner of the Vermont Teddy Bear property. Yeah. So I think Dean had circulated an email kind of summarizing the request that we wanted to bring to your attention tonight, along with the plan. And this really, so the genesis of this is, this function is currently provided on the old Gilbane property lot off Lakeside Avenue in Burlington now. With the construction of the Champlain Parkway and the hospital looking to relocate, this particular use is looking for another site. It's a South Burlington, Shelburne Road car dealer that stores their vehicles. It's not a site that's open to the public. It's not a site where they do any kind of sales or auto repair. It's simply a vehicle storage area, and that's what we're here for tonight. After talking with staff, it was suggested that we approach the Planning Commission and make the request that the Commission consider this type of use, and whether it's a vehicle storage area or a parking area or some other term. You know, there's always unintended consequences of what it might be classified as, but this type of use be allowed within the Commerce and Industry South District. Auto and machinery repair is currently a conditional use. Again, that's not what is happening at this site. It's simply the storage of vehicles, no repair on site or sales. And this particular site, we think, lends itself to this use. The vehicle storage, again, parking area, whatever it was classified as, we think would be an appropriate conditional use for this zoning district if it was appropriately screened. We're well aware of the purpose of the zoning district, includes protecting and preserving scenic views from adjacent lands, Route 7 and other public vantage points. And this site in particular, because of the large shipping and assembly building just to the north of the Teddy Bear factory, a large berm along the east boundary, existing developed properties between Route 7 and the potential location on this site, as well as existing vegetation to the north and along McCabe's Brook and along the perimeter property line. This site is fairly well screened and would have additional screening in terms of a fence and landscaping around that fence that would enclose the perimeter, both for screening but also for security purposes. So I'd be happy to get into more details on the site or answer questions or more specifics on the use.
The site is pretty well developed for that future addition, so it's really a matter of taking off the overburden and what small shrubs and trees have grown up there, and laying down some fabric and some stone and paving it and putting in the fence. So it's not a major construction site per se.
Right. So just a little bit of background on that. There was a third phase always envisioned with this PUD as part of the shipping and assembly building The first phase was the east half of the building, the second phase was the west half, and then there was a north half, each being 60,000 square feet. So that area encompasses a portion of what's shown up there in the shaded area.
And I take it that to mean that there wasn't at least I suppose from a teddy bear perspective, there wasn't a
We don't
phase
expect
3.
that they'll ever expand past where they are.
Right. Okay. Any questions just from that?
Just a detail, but you said it was would be mostly not visible. Are there areas where it would be seen from adjacent houses or other, or is it just that?
I think to say it's not going to be visible from adjacent properties, I think realistically it's going to be visible from, some portions of the two properties between this site and Route 7. But again, there's a large landscaped berm along the east boundary that was constructed to screen the building that's there now from I can't recall the condominiums to the northeast corner of the property. You've got the industrial area to the north, but there is an existing hedgerow along the property line, and that also turns and extends along the westerly boundary of this property between the lots that are along Route 7 in this particular site. Again, kind of getting into the specifics of this particular proposal, there'd be an 8-foot fence, there'd be landscaping around the perimeter of the fence as well, and certainly the vehicles wouldn't be any higher than that. So, the fence and the screening would provide a supplemental form of screening and in addition to the topography, the berm, the existing mature vegetation that's there, the building to the south. This is sort of well fit into this corner of the site, given the characteristics of the particular site, but, there would be additional screening in terms of the fence and additional landscaping around the perimeter that would come along with the specifics of this proposal.
Thank you.
Would you want to see a bit further away view on Google Earth just to get a sense of the context?
Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
And I think the question for me is it seems innocuous enough in the grand scheme of things, so I'm wondering what could go there in that district. I mean, what's wrong with it? What else is in that district that somebody would want to be like, I know, let's put a big park and ride here or something, shuttle.
If we change the zoning,
if
what
we
else
change the
could
zoning for
happen?
that, because it's less about the screening for this particular property than it is what's the impact on the zoning district as a whole, right? And so, what's the negative implications for the rest of the district of doing this? I don't know if there are any, but
Yeah, and there's a few things that would need to happen. So first, and this is great. Thank you for being here and presenting this. Part of this is to understand what change is being requested. So in this case, it would be for the Commerce and Industry South, modifying the regulations to ensure that this could be an accepted use.
Yeah.
And with that is exactly what you're talking about, identifying what other impacts could that have. I think there's another aspect to this, especially with the recent Economic Development Summit, as that is gathering steam. There was a lot of discussion around what's happening with the Shelburne Green Park there and what might be done to either encourage additional uses and or expansion of existing uses. And I don't think that we're in a position to comment on that because that ball just started really moving. But these are all factors that would go into this discussion.
One thing that that we've just seen is that there was a big pushback on just a restaurant at the Shelburne Green, which was going to be people laughing and eating and stuff like that. How is this better than what would happen there? It's adjacent, it's touching those condominiums, and don't know. It looks like it would be visible to them. So it's not really it seems like it's not a compatible use to residential, just off the top of my head, because there's a berm that wraps a few feet around the corner, but not all the way around. And
that berm on the east side is like 20 feet high, and we planted that, heavily planted that, so it's up there.
It's up there.
Yeah.
Does it wrap around to the north, on the
It
north
does
side
wrap,
though?
it does wrap around here, and that's why this little corner was clipped. It comes around here, and then there's also vegetation along that north property line. And as Bob said, there's not only the topography of the berm, but that was planted in 2004, 2005, so it's had about 15 years of growth.
Sure, so that's, from like looking at geometry, it's hard to tell because we can't see those condos there on the plan, but
Yeah, so
it
the
looks
condos
like
are in
the
this.
berm was, like, it's shielding the big warehouse from the condos, but
Right.
it's not necessarily shielding what's happening in the parking lot. Now, I guess my question
Well,
is,
the berm goes past all the way to the corner of the property, so it really, along pretty much that whole, the portion of the big warehouse, so.
so what happens in a auto storage facility? I assume that there's going to be car hauling trucks coming in from wherever, New York, Boston, or any port, coming either down from the north, from I-89, or up from the south. And I just imagine that, I mean, I know what's happening on Route 7. It's like trucks are, there's no timetable on trucks. It's not like
Well,
daytime.
They're coming into Burlington to deliver the same cars, so either way, right now. So I don't think it would add, and typically those trucks come in the middle of the night, you know, and they get there early and unload and back out of there, but,
And as far as lighting goes, I saw in the memo that there would be lighting of some kind, but, you know,
We're
to
gonna
get
leave that.
above a,
whatever you know, I think they would like some security lighting in there, but we could put that on sensors depending on what the board requests, so it's fenced, so.
so as far as sensors, though, in the
Yeah.
middle of the night, if somebody's, you know,
Came in and light up, maybe.
yeah, it's gonna light up in 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning. Is that the way
Well,
it's,
we haven't got to that point yet.
yeah?
But it wouldn't necessarily have to illuminate the entire parking lot. It might illuminate a zone. And there'd be security cameras in all likelihood that would be triggered by the motion as well. So, I mean, this would be a fairly secure
It's a
facility
locked
between,
gate. It's a secured parking lot, so it'll be locked.
but the light could certainly be addressed by reducing levels at night, which would be typical anyway, or combining that with simply shutting off some percentage of fixtures or all of them, or lowering them to a 20 or 30% level tied to the motion that would raise the lighting level if need be.
So that's a light issue. Then there's sound that would happen with a diesel truck pulling in at any hour of the night next to residential
I don't see
area.
that's a lot of traffic. I mean, if you had, 3 or 4 trailer loads a week, you know, maybe something like that.
Right,
So
and
it's
the
not like
loading,
it's a steady stream.
I mean, the loading, I'm not sure whether the loading would occur in the loading area for the shipping assembly building or in this area here, but, you know, that's 500 feet, another 100 feet here roughly to the, you know, there would be several hundred feet of separation between any activity that might be occurring earlier or later in the day and the residential property. We're well aware of the residences up here. They were very active in the prior DRB reviews for both phases of the shipping and assembly building, so,
Sure.
you know, the landowner is very aware of their concerns, and, you know, that's why the berm was constructed with the landscaping in the first place, and so we are well aware of their concerns and
Well, it was
wanting to make sure
constructed
that
for the
they're.
original teddy bear. And, and then when Teddy Bear got in trouble, no one ever kept up the landscaping, so most of it died. And so when we bought the property to build the first phase of this project, we went in and said that, you know, at the time Teddy Bear is either save Teddy Bear or save the trees, and they chose to save Teddy Bear at the time when they were in real deep trouble back 30 years ago. So one of the things that we said is we'll go in and we'll landscape that whole berm as part of the deal, and once we got approval, we started that berm the next day, and it was interesting because it was all kind of mud there, and we had to use a half-track to get the trees to the top of that berm, so, but we had committed ourselves to it, and we did it, but, so.
And also trying to keep the context around this, and again, appreciate you coming in. This is part of the open comment to introduce the subject and see about getting this onto a future agenda if we're to move forward and change the use for that space. But to add on to where I was before, there were three that I had. The zoning use change implications, to your point, what side effects might that have to other potential areas, the economic development process that is in play right now that has a fair number of moving parts. The third point was just considering the entryway off of Route 7. It comes in off South Park Drive and curves around, and would curve around and go past the teddy bear facility, right?
Right, access would be off the end of the loading area.
Right. So
for the
there,
shipping and assembly building now.
and I imagine if nothing else, things would need to be coordinated because I know around busy times they have trucks backed up and.
I mean, once we get through this, I have to talk to Bill, but I don't see a problem with them. But and I think we might just throw out something else if you think traffic is something we'd be willing to pay an impact fee to offset. Maybe we have a pet project someplace where I think we'd be willing to. And it's not a bribe, but to contribute to maybe $25,000 to a project to see this go. From my standpoint, I'm neutral. I don't care if it goes or not. I'm 85 years old, and you know, we're trying to make it work for everyone else. But if I got to chase a rabbit down a hole for 2 years, I won't be here by the time we catch the rabbit, if we catch it at all. So I'm just trying to make it work for everyone. So I think everyone can win, and if we can somehow figure it out. And obviously, time is of the essence. We'd like to start it this fall, but that's probably not possible. But we've agreed to let the car dealer stay there until we put something together.
And being realistic with a regulatory change, I mean, I think I'm happy to be corrected, but I would think anything under 2 months would be next to not possible.
In the winter anyway.
Right, yeah.
If we had, see the light at the end of the tunnel, and as long as it's not a train.
Yeah, I honestly, I couldn't comment on that right now, just given the what's happening, particularly around economic development, because with some of the discussions that have been happening around the Shelburne Green and what's happening there, there have been a lot of things that I'm sure we'd all wish might have gone a different way, but now with discussions about discussing what might be allowed in that area and what complementary space around that might benefit from those changes as well. I mean, it might be something more useful to the community.
And the other thing, 10 years down the road, it may, maybe we end up putting another building out there because they say we don't need the parking any longer. They do their business different, and we could always then the parking's in place to put another industrial building down there. So there's enough flexibility still for us. So.
Right. Was there anything else that you'd like to comment on around this? And
No, we just wanted to present the concept and be here to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, appreciate it. When I saw the memo, I was just really interested in hearing a bit more about it from your perspective, and then we need to see where this goes. But as mentioned, with moving parts and needing to coordinate with the select board and the what's happening from an economic development perspective, and particularly in that space, given some of the controversies that have happened recently, I have a suspicion that there's going to be a fair amount of conversation around that anyway, and this would be part of it.
Okay.
So, yeah. Well, thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you
Thank you.
listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right.
Where's a good restaurant?
Yeah.
I'm not the one to ask. I'm married, or not married, I live with someone who's a chef, so, and she's,
I just like to,
I don't think she's affecting
I
company.
don't know how long you've lived in town, but we lived in Shelburne back 30 years ago, and so we've always tried to be a good corporate citizen, and we built the original rescue building and donated it to the town. back 30 years ago, 25 years ago, so just,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, that is the economic development forum was enlightening, especially in hearing the comments that Shelburne not necessarily open for business and that sort of thing. And
Change that attitude around.
yeah, it's just about having civil discussions and coming
Yeah.
up with a good solution that fits. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks
So,
for seeing
yeah.
us.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
All right. While we're still open to the public, are any topics that aren't on the agenda tonight? So you all are here for something on the agenda that's coming up? Or just checking it out? Oh, excellent. The best kind of open to, yeah, all right. Cool. Well, let's move on to zoning matters then. Oh,
Will there be discussion around that?
not
Just
tonight.
happen? Not
No.
tonight, but I just mean in general, like.
At some point, yeah, the way the process works is that open to the public in the beginning is if there are any issues that businesses, individuals, residents, whoever have that they would like the planning commission to address. And given how thick the regulations can get sometimes, the nature of how they've grown over time, changes need to be made. So next steps would be we would schedule time to have some deliberation around it and weigh all the pros and cons. And then if we decided that we did want to move forward with that change, we would need to get all the details together and put a package together justifying it, approve that, warn a hearing from the planning commission perspective, and then get that to the select board. Once it passes our hearing, they would have a public hearing, and then there'd be chance to discuss there as well. And then if they ended up approving it, then it would become a regulation. that
There
can
would be
taken
a
advantage
moment for public to weigh in on stuff.
Multiple instances.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that under agenda item 8, when you talk about future meeting topics, you may not know when you're going to be taking it up, but you might know that you're not going to take it up at, say, the next meeting?
Right, right. And that's really where it is. I wouldn't really even want to get this on the schedule until we have a better understanding of the economic development outcome, where the select board stands. I don't want to be the negative person in the room, but just recognizing that the select board is heading into end of year budget discussions, and I think they would be happy to not be getting extra stuff from us at this time, and we're already giving them things. That this is probably not something that would happen until.
But like just keeping an eye on March. Like,
Yeah, the hearings get warned there, and in the. Do they still go into Shelburne News?
Well, the hearings for anything that's a true hearing, we typically go in the free press because they publish more frequently. But if we're talking about what the agenda items are, those go online, and their announcements are made in Front Porch Forum.
Yeah. So if you keep an eye on that, or even just search the website every now and then, or they also, do they end up on the website?
The agendas are on the website.
Yeah.
figure out how to put those, so, yeah.
Yeah, so anytime you see something like that, if there's an agenda item, we generally try to keep the times as close as we can. Sometimes conversations go long. Yeah, to enable people to come in for the times for the discussions they're most curious about. And thoroughly want input from everybody, because otherwise it ends up being what tonight is for. That's a quorum. At full strength, we'd be 7. So if we don't get input from anybody, it's just a discussion amongst the 7 of us, and that's not as helpful. So, yeah, appreciate input. Any other questions before we move on? All right. Well, then moving on to the form-based zoning stormwater requirement threshold.
I can sort of set things up with the stuff that was in the packet.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the scenarios are really good. And-
So I just wanted in the packet to have something that made it really clear how the jurisdiction works. Basically, what gets captured by the regs, and by regs I mean the stormwater section of the form-based zoning, and what doesn't. So I made this graphic, which is based on the text that was included on, it's section 22053B, the stormwater stuff. And the specific thing that we're talking about is the applicability section. And so, again, I've just graphed it out. If there's a project, is it limited to just adding impervious surface? I felt like it was maybe helpful to think about this and kind of some of the extremes. So if it's something that just would be like the project we were talking about, it's adding impervious surface and that's all that it's doing. The questions that we ask are mapped out here. Does the site have 18,000 square feet already? Would it add 3,000 more? If the amount that is added is more than 50% of what's there, then the entire site would have to meet the bylaw's stormwater requirements. So that's kind of the extreme, that you add a lot and you get your property entirely involved with the form-based zoning stormwater. There are other cases, though, where the amount that's added is not as much, and only what you would add would be subject to the regulations. I didn't want to spend too much time going through this because I think it's self-explanatory. Instead, wanted to talk about these scenarios.
Yeah, before you do that, I just
Okay.
had one question around, and I'm sure I'm just missing something. The example on the right with the 21,780 square feet, that's half an acre, right?
So, yes.
So just to get an idea, because the applicability things kick in, if you're under half an acre, none of this applies. You don't have to do those requirements. If it's over, you do. So I get that number, but I was curious about the 1870.
That's because that's accounting for the 3,000 square feet.
Right. Okay. That's what I was missing.
Yeah.
I'm sort of missing, where does the 3,000 square feet come in?
So the 3,000 square feet is used in the regs to say that if you're only adding 2,999 square feet, then you aren't triggered. It's kind of the escape clause. If you're just doing that little bit of a change, it's an escape clause.
And this was where, again, for context, we had Don from the Natural Resources Committee come in and suggest quarter acre over half acre and
Okay.
5,000 square feet instead of 3,000, or no, 1,500 instead of 3,000.
Right.
But it's about balancing, if we want people to use form-based code, not making that egregiously more difficult than standard zoning, because then somebody could just use standard.
Yeah, so I was just illustrating what the proposal as it was developed with Brandy's help and Amy McCrellis's help, how it plays out, basically. And then I wanted to just give people an understanding by illustrating, because this flow chart can kind of make sense, but it doesn't really illustrate it in terms of something in the real world. So one thing that would be a scenario is you have a 1 acre lot, 19,000 square feet is covered. You're going to add more than 3,000, let's say 3,500. And then if you had a slightly larger lot and none of it's covered, it's a green lot, and 20,000 square feet of impervious surface, that's still less than half an acre, so no control by the regs. So there, it's may seem like a pretty stark contrast that you get to add a lot of impervious surface and not be subject to the regs, where someone who's already got a paved site and they're adding a little, that additional impervious surface is subject to the regs, but that's how it's set up. And then a 2 acre lot, let's say it's also greenfield, and if you added 25,000, well, then the entire site would be covered. And then, so just adding pavement, those are kind of clear. The ones that are a little bit tougher to understand can be when you have reconstruction. And really, everything that I've said before tonight is the setup for situations where a site is being reconstructed, because the regs come into play in those cases as well. So if you have, and by reconstructed, we have to figure out what does that mean. So would reconstructed be taking a gravel parking area and putting pavement on it, would reconstruction be having a 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 square foot building, knocking it down and replacing it? Yeah, that would be. But what about a situation where you are taking that building and you're doing serious interior renovations, but you're not knocking it down? So how would that play out? So in these scenarios that I drew up, if you got a 19,000 square foot, an acre lot, similar amount of coverage as the one above, 19,000. If it's going to be 3,500, it's all below that half acre. Nothing is subject to the regs. If you've got something that's 22,000 square feet, so not quite. If you're going to add 3,500 square feet, or do reconstruction, I should say, on 3,500 square feet, well, that 3,500 square feet will be subject, and so on. You can take a 2-acre lot, something that's bigger, and you could do 20,000 square feet, reconstruct it, knock it all down, and just what you reconstruct, because it's less than half an acre, is going to be subject to the regs, not the entire site. It's not until you go from 20,000 to the 22,000 where the entire site would be subject to regs. And the thing I wanted to show that may make it a little clearer, maybe makes it less clear. So just trying to, whoops. So, and this is maybe too abstract, but I tried to keep it simple. So in each of these cases, the comparison I want to draw is between the top one and the one below, across it on the street. So here, in that first set of examples that I was giving, where they're just adding impervious surface, if this is all impervious surface already, let's just say it's a parking lot, and you're adding this little amount that's less than 3,000, well, no jurisdiction. Same situation, but you add a little bit more, you get over that 3,000, well, that's what's going to trigger it. And then similarly, if you got a bigger lot and you're adding this amount, if it's below that half an acre, no regulations. You go over that threshold, it's all subject to the regs. And then going on to the examples that we were talking about, reconstruction, if you've got a site and you're reconstructing it and it's below that threshold, no regulations. You get that site and you got a little bit more, and it's triggered, that's going to be subject to the review. Now, figuring out what that actually means is going to be a bit of a challenge, because we're trying to figure out what is the change, or what is the stormwater contribution of that reconstructed area. So if you have a packed gravel parking area and it becomes, with a runoff coefficient, it's not 100, but it's pretty high. Most of the rain that hits that runs off. We're going to be looking at a change that's not all that dramatic. And so having to accommodate that, it's not going to take, I think, a serious investment, but that's the kind of thing that you're looking at, is you're going to be calculating the difference in runoff before and after. Some of these reconstructions, I'm not even sure if there would be a measurable difference. If it's a building coming down and then a new building coming up, same size, then it may not have much difference, but the regs are saying that it's going to be subject.
Yeah, the discussion around that definition last time was really intriguing.
Yeah. So with these, to try to make this issue clearer, what I've understood you're needing to figure out is, if you're going back to this, are you going to use the definition that's at the end, which uses dollars as the value?
Can I just say not likely?
And if you're not, what would be the substitute? And in the materials that I had sent to you before, the things that might be substitute would be if you just spelled it out as when a building is demolished and rebuilt, you would consider that reconstruction. Maybe you would say going from gravel to paved isn't, maybe you would. But to define it more specifically, I guess, if you're not gonna do dollars, because like there was some recognition of last time, if there's no definition, it's gonna be really tough for the person who's administering these to be
Yeah,
able
but
to.
if you do it based on costs, who could fault a developer for saying, okay, I'm gonna use cheap materials to do this thing and not make it as nice as I would want
Yep.
to because of the threshold?
I did have one detailed question on the cost part. So I was looking over the language again because I get the argument on why cost is not the best way, but I can't think of a better metric to use. And it says if the structure is, I don't know it's if the cost of the
Substantial.
new structure is more than 50% of the cost of the old structure. And I was wondering, is the structure, if you're replacing the roof, are you just talking about, is the cost of the new roof more than 50% of the cost of the old roof? Or is it the cost of what you're adding is more than 50% of the cost of the entire structure? Because that would make a
I think of
difference
it
in-
as, what's the cost of the new, if you have a building that's $100,000 in value, let's just say, and replacing the roof costs $10,000, then it's 10%. If replacing the roof was somehow improbably $51,000, then you'd be over the 50%.
So it's not
That's how
the
I've
cost of the old
interpreted
roof
it.
versus the cost of the new roof.
I think of it in
Because if you're,
terms
if you're
of,
getting that specific, then 50% is,
It's relative
Not
to the
causing a
cost of the
problem.
whole
it has to be the
value of
whole building. Okay,
That's the way I
yeah,
read
I
it.
think we're on the same.
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, it is a kind of a tough thing to say. If you have, like, if you take it in those numbers, $100,000 value of building, well, you know, you could potentially, with a new roof and new windows, get up above $50,000 if you're replacing all those things with something of any quality. And so, you know, why should you have to redo wastewater if you're just replacing windows and roof, you know?
And you wouldn't want it to be a consideration to say, okay, well, we want to be able to make these 3 changes, but if we add in the 3rd change, that's going to put us over the threshold. So we're going to do these 2 changes now, wait a year, and then do the 3rd change. Like, you get into those games that it doesn't make sense for anyone involved, I don't think.
How are you establishing cost or value of the existing structure?
That's, yeah. There's a lot of subjectivity to this that's what makes me really uneasy around cost. But similar, it's what other metric do we do? Which is why I'm intrigued by the discussion around that definition and how we can get around it.
Yeah, well, what I thought there was some support for was the possibility of just pulling it out and let the chips fall where they may without the definition, but some
It'll just
consideration
come
given that may have implications, and so maybe some plan B could be agreed on. And the best advice I can give you at the moment is that if you can specify the examples, the cases, that would be the instances where you feel like that's enough for it to be the whole site and the things that would be less. Just make it clearer with a word description, but not.
Yeah, is there a way based on anybody's knowledge that we could describe the act of if a site is being redeveloped in a way that impacts the foundation, like the impervious surface that's there to begin with?
Or impacts the runoff, since we're talking about stormwater.
Yeah, I keep going there, and then I don't know what models and metrics and how that how the industry would look at those things.
I'm just trying to think of recent projects in Shelburne, and I don't know what's going on at the church over here on Church Street is one, right, where they've taken down a building and they're putting up a new addition, and they're doing some work to driveways and parking lots and stuff. And so I was wondering, like, how would that be impacted by this for the town hall right over here, the library, right? I mean, we took down a building, we did a bunch of work in the parking lot. How do those
Yeah,
how
so
do those examples fit into this?
okay, so both of those cases have a little bit of complexity because they're, well, for different reasons. But if we were to just assume that these were all kind of homogeneous buildings, the value of that, I'm not sure what the value of this building would be, but if the value that was added was, I mean, we're adding impervious surface. So do we want to deal with it from an impervious surface standpoint or from the reconstruction standpoint? Because the additional impervious surface part is easy, and that might have triggered it based
It
on.
seems like
impervious.
that's what we should be focusing on.
The additional impervious surface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
So, right, but that's not the only thing.
It's sort of like
That
if I
has been
stand,
there.
if I stand across the road and look at the new library, and like, we should be talking about, stormwater for that project.
Well, so let's use an example of, say, the Sirloin Saloon property, that it's been there, the parking lot has grass growing through it and all that. So if that were to be redeveloped, and no concept of the size of that off the top of my head, but in that example, that parking lot, if it were to be used in any meaningful way, needs to be resurfaced. It needs to be redone. That parking lot is not usable in its current form. To me, that would be substantial reconstruction. If there is an existing parking lot, for example, and somebody is just going to rehab the building that's already sitting on that site, to me, that's not impacting what that impervious surface is like in a significant way, unless there are reasons that that's not correct. This is what I.
Do you want to use the mic?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I want to make sure that you get heard because the minutes.
I don't disagree with you. I just think it's really subjective.
Well,
Who decides whether a parking lot is in a state of disrepair that
Well,
needs?
And that's a
Yes.
fair question. I would
Yeah.
imagine any developer that came into that site would not just pick all the weeds and say we're good.
I don't disagree with you. on
Or
that.
maybe they would.
But that one may be obvious, but there may others that are not as obvious.
Which is why this is not a
Right.
simple. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that aside, I know we're trying to right some wrongs of the past, like, paving, what's been paved over and trying to fix that. But to be fair to a developer coming in, shouldn't we just say if you're adding parking, adding building to a certain degree, then you have to look at the wastewater, but if you're keeping the same amount of impervious, keeping the same amount of ground impervious and building impervious, then you're okay with the waste, not doing vast improvements to the wastewater system, or stormwater system. It's the wastewater.
Yeah, because I'm not sure how widely it was distributed, but the numbers that you got, I just asked the
From
question
Tom?
from Tom about what is the additional cost to add in the stormwater considerations, and
Yeah, I think
the
that-
numbers were not small.
Last
Yeah,
meeting.
quite a range too.
Quite a range.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm trying to look at it from the and again, let's go back to the parking lot with the grass growing through it. A new owner could come in and say, all right, well, we're gonna pick all the weeds and throw tar over the gaps, and it's the same parking lot. We're gonna work on the building. The reconstruction of a building that's already on site with the same foundation. This came up in our discussion of substantial reconstruction, and I don't think any of us thought that interior work and to some degree building work in general necessarily needed to fall into that. I like the idea of what impact would the new design have on stormwater and that sort of thing, but that gets down a rabbit hole
Yeah.
that I'm not sure anybody could solve for a given project easily. But if they were to take the parking lot, say, pick all the weeds and tar over it, it might look terrible. That might just be what they're going to do. But at some point, if they decided, okay, we're going to resurface this parking lot, then that would be the trigger to say, okay, now if you're actually going to be doing work on this site and tearing stuff up, you need to put in the infrastructure underneath that's going to manage the stormwater around it. That's the concept that I'm going for.
Well, the concept of the regulations is to increase the degree of jurisdiction over stormwater. And the logic of it is that if you have this site that's derelict and there's nothing happening with it, and there's an investment of any real consequence in it, then when that happens, it's the time for the stormwater problems that have existed to be addressed. I mean, to me, it's kind of like, well, think of it as kind of an implementation, a staged implementation of something that may apply across the board in the future. It's just that you're anticipating it. I mean, the day may come where if you're doing any work in this, if you've got a lot that's over a certain size, more than just a postage stamp, you do anything, or that lot, it may be just retroactively, you're told you've got to control the stormwater from it. I mean, that day could come. And this is anticipating that kind of situation by saying, if you're going to invest substantially in it, and the substantially is the 50% threshold, then you have to include in your investments the stormwater. And then I do get that with some old building, the windows and the roof and some other things that just in terms of the percentage of the building overall could be really small, could pop over the 50%.
And impact a lot of decisions that we might not
Yeah,
want
and you don't want it to discourage the investment. That's the trick, because some people may look at this and say, oh, okay, I'm just going to defer my maintenance and not address it.
And with the question, could you grab the,
So I'm just trying to clarify, so it's because we don't have that regulation yet that we can't just say any new construction is going to require the stormwater?
Well, there's two components to this. This really I spent more time than I'd like to admit trying to get this in my head earlier. The first thing is for anything that's under a half acre, it doesn't apply. So new or otherwise, if it's under a half acre, the stormwater management requirements don't kick in. Separate from that, and that's new construction, let's say. Separate from that is if there is substantial reconstruction on an existing site. So something is already in place, and then there's the additional, I might have just lapped myself.
Well, I mean, it's just, the difference is adding or reconstructing, or you can also do the combination of. You could be doing some reconstruction and some addition, and you'd be totaling up the reconstruction part and the additional part to give you your answer to your question is, hasn't there been enough to be subject to the whole?
And adding also includes if you have a blank site that's 3/4 of an acre, if you do anything to it, then you have to consider the wastewater.
And to take a step back, the zoning that we're talking about is an optional overlay. So it's different from the zoning that's absolutely required to build.
That was my
so-
question, is if, like, we don't have a strong arm here. Like, we're just trying to, like, subtly
Yeah.
push people in the right direction.
So
Okay.
they have carrots in this zoning. They can do increased density. I've been learning all this the last few meetings. But there are things that encourage people to use this zoning, and what the town gets out of it are things like this, that improve the appearance of the town is going for, improve stormwater. But if the worry is if you make this too strong, then you lose it, and we go back to weaker stormwater in the standard zoning. So it's that balance. that we're trying to
Obviously, I'm
find.
just like, ecosystem services aren't being accounted for ever, like, we need to, but we don't have the regulatory, like.
Yeah. And we had a discussion a few meetings ago about strengthening the underlying zoning to match this. So
Yeah, so who is
that's
in
not
charge?
the trade-off.
Okay. So who is in charge of that, other underlying zoning?
That's also
That's us.
Okay.
So a little bit more.
Sorry, I hope it's okay that I'm
No,
trying to
this is
learn.
good because it's
Okay.
educational. Yeah, probably don't want to spend too much time on
Right,
it, and
right,
I'd be happy to. I mean,
This
any
can
of
be a
us would be
separate
happy
thing,
to talk.
or you can
Yeah,
email me or something, yeah.
yeah, but there's this committee. We meet twice a month, and there's a lot of stuff that happens. For this form-based zoning that Megan mentioned got approved in 2016. There was a minor amendment to it in 2017, I believe. Since then, after receiving a lot of input from developers and various other parties, we want it to be used because it does account for more environmental concerns and things that we would like to accomplish. In parallel to all this, there are also issues in the current regulations that might come up, and we address those as well. And traditionally, that's what we do. Over the last couple of years, though, we spent the bulk of last year working on the town plan revision, which is a state mandate. You have to update your town plan now every 8 years. And then as soon as we finished that, we had a preliminary amendment package to this form-based zone that a consultant had put together for us, and we essentially had to put it on hold for that year that we were working on the town plan. And this came up as part of going through that amendment. And in addition to the things that the consultant had brought up, we've picked up some other things that we want to get into this amendment package, and this is one of them. If that makes sense in a nutshell.
Yeah, so, and maybe just also helpful to say that this group had been giving serious consideration to keeping the field level, because right now it's harder to deal with stormwater under form-based zoning than it is under the regular zoning. And so that might make someone decide, oh, I'm going to use the regular zoning because I don't want to deal with that. But there are some things in form-based zoning that make it more attractive. But the idea was to make it level so that if people were choosing between form-based zoning and the regular zoning, their decision wasn't going to hinge on stormwater because everything was going to be the same. It's just that that's been put aside because they want to get something warned.
Right, yeah, we really want to get these changes warned so that that can get into the process and we can get that going, and then we can go back and, bureaucaucy can be fun.
And do a stormwater update
Yes.
that's comprehensive.
Yes, yeah. And I'm wondering, maybe just to get some more thoughts out there. In the previous two slides, when I was going through this, it's really setting aside the discussions of saying, yes, I mean, personally, and I'm not embarrassed or not worried about saying this, that I would like to see it more restrictive, similar to what Don from the Natural Resources Committee came in to say, or to suggest. I also recognize the need for balancing, and we would like to steer people more toward form-based zoning for a host of other reasons. So these are all more long game type things that hopefully we can get to before the planet burns up. But really it was that second example that stood out to me as the one that I just had a problem with.
Is
And
that this one that we're looking at right here?
yeah, the second one right there with the
Oh,
2-acre lot, you have just under a half acre, but it's not subject to anything. And to me, if there's a green field or something where there is new impervious surface being put in, I can hear all of the arguments, and this is where I was just going a little bit insane and just my mind was lapping, because I can hear all the arguments against if you said, all right, what scenario could we put in that makes that second example be subject to regulations? And it's basically reducing it or saying if it's a new area, it needs to incorporate stormwater management.
Right, greenfield development would be,
There has to be some
Treated
kind of a
differently.
cutoff, which is why we're here. I think I just needed to say that. That was really the one, out of all the discussions we've had, it was that example that I was really struggling with saying, yeah, okay, that's cool. And I don't know that there's a way around it without creating bigger problems.
Where did the model for this come from? This
for the
whole
particular stormwater
structure,
stuff?
yeah, and the idea of the substantially reconstructed, is that?
Okay, so the consultant that was hired was actually the head of a team, and Amy McCrellis is the person who works for Stone Environmental, which is a firm in Montpelier that does a lot of water quality work. They do a lot of different types of environmental work. And Amy was the person who was focusing specifically on the stormwater piece of form-based zoning. There are similarities in what is in here and what's in the South Burlington regulations, but they're in the process of updating theirs. But the logic is not that different, I would say, from other stormwater regulations, including some of the state of Vermont regulations, but those are just at a higher level. And that's one of the things that was a deliberate choice when working with Amy and the team, was to make Shelburne's regulations kick in before the state regulations kicked in. And that was something that there was feedback on. Some people that attended a kind of small group session, they were saying, no, the state regs are enough. Don't give us something more than the state. But there are those that feel like the state regulations, as they were then, were not capturing enough weren't capturing enough of those sites that were developed before we had real stormwater controls.
So the idea of the monetary marker, it comes from the state regulations.
That's a good question. I'm not
I
sure
didn't
that
research
that's in
that
the
before.
state regulations,
Okay.
but that's, I've seen dollars used, value used in other situations.
Thank you.
I mean, it's helpful context. I do look at buildings and feel like every building, every property has a point in time where it's going to get an investment, and it's like every 40 years or something like this. You know what I mean? Where somebody's going to come along and dump a bunch of money into it and put some investment into it and really buff it up. And to your point, that is the time when you should, right, where we should really raise the bar and make it comprehensive. Kind of hearing you talk about it, that resonates in terms of the dollar value. It's like, oh, that's where that comes from. Somebody's going to put a bunch of money into this property, more so than, you know, some percentage of what the property's worth. Now is the time.
Which really
But-
comes down to the definition of, in this case, the hang up for all of us is this, what does substantially reconstructed mean? I mean, as much as I would like to say, if you have a green field with that second example of 20,000 square feet, somebody wants to just add that amount of impervious surface, and there's no trigger or requirement to manage runoff, and maybe that little patch of where it is isn't really consequential. It's more about establishing I can see it from a lot of different stakeholder perspectives, and I think I keep spinning my wheels because it's frustrating.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not sure how best to get through the mud.
So, refresh my memory from 2 weeks ago. Where does it give the dollar amount?
So
in the sec?
the definition, Stephen, if you go to the very last page of the package,
Oh, yeah.
the
right.
definition is of substantial reconstruction. And substantial reconstruction is defined there, and it's up on the wall. And it carries up over to the top.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so it does define 50% of the market value of the structure now.
So, right now, if it's under, well, if we go into the applicability part of it on page 45, then if the combination of new impervious area created and the redevelopment or substantial reconstruction of existing impervious surfaces is less than 3,000 square feet, then the application is exempt from requirements of this section. So that's,
Minor little changes get under. I mean, they don't
yeah,
capture jurisdiction.
yeah. So if what we're trying to do is to really get everything to be updated that's being worked on, maybe that's as good as it is.
I mean, the other thing is the macro way this process works is you put it out there, and when it's challenged, and decisions are made off of that. I mean, it's like the DRB with their quasi-judicial. If this were to be challenged and they say, okay, here's our problem and here's what we recommend in terms of a change, then that would come back and we'd need to deliberate this. I really struggle with having cost in there because I feel like shortcuts would be the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that line where a shortcut can get you below that line, but, you know, so you can kind of work the system when you're close to that line, and that's going to happen.
Right.
But,
There's always going to be a line somewhere.
yeah, yeah.
And I also wonder, I mean, we had someone, when we were talking about the sidewalk, and he said, you know, it's not that big a deal to me in the end. I'll do it either way. Like, it'd make more sense one way than the other. And I feel like if you're doing a big project and you have putting in this massive amount of money, it seems like the cost of the stormwater wouldn't be enough to make you dramatically change the quality of your product. Like if you're right on the edge, maybe, but you're not going to say, I'm going to go from a high-end hotel to a whatever based off the stormwater. I don't know the numbers of all this. It all seemed like the South Burlington stuff, it depended a lot on where you were and what was there, and it wasn't a clear X amount per square foot kind of thing. But I guess I can't think of a better thing than cost, and I think we need something, because I think if we take it out, we're just going to throw this on Dean's desk, and he's going to have the same... sorry.
Sorry.
Well, then we can do it. Then it's fine. Yeah.
He's out
That's all
tomorrow.
set.
He's out tomorrow.
I guess until we can come up with a better solution, I lean towards leaving this in place.
I think I agree.
Yeah, I hear that, and I'm not sure what other options we have at this point. But I'm also hearing the arguments that you all might not have been here, but the discussions around secondary agriculture and the current rules of needing to provide financials to show what percentage was from your primary agriculture and what is secondary. And from a business owner perspective, farmer perspective, that can be a rabbit hole in what other business is required to show those kinds of financials.
At least this is just once.
I know this is just once, and it's a different situation, but you can feel what that resistance is going to be, and I'd just like to have something in there to say, to acknowledge that we've thought about this. I'm just not sure how. I just don't think money is the driving factor, but I don't see another option, so I'm just being wordy now.
Well, I mean, I think that to the early discussion about how does it integrate with the base zoning regulations, I mean, it seems clear to me from this conversation and other conversations that the idea of doing a comprehensive redevelopment of both together, such that they mesh well, should be a priority. And perhaps we just move this along, these pieces, and leave this as it's been, as a path of least resistance for now, but then go back and bring them both sets of documents into alignment, and perhaps with a higher level of expectation, higher level of standard.
And also, if we have a way of just tracking these types of things as well, I mean, it could end up being that there's only that second example with the just under a half acre having a parking lot put in or something, that those may not be frequent case studies. Mm-hmm. So it's more the concept that I think is really frustrating, but it might not be a practical issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
there aren't a lot of green sites in the corridor. There are some, and those that do exist tend to be the kinds of things that are bigger that someone would be doing a big project on.
Yeah. And substantial redevelopment or reconstruction that'll just come out at some point. We'll have more inputs a year from now, maybe.
I like the idea of doing this wastewater for form-based zoning and standard zoning together as a separate unit, because I'm at a loss as to what we're comparing this to right now. That's, I guess, why it makes sense to me to leave it as it is right now, and then, like Neil's saying, go back, look at both of those two together, and then make an amendment to this again, and warn it, and go through the process again just for that piece. Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me.
For me as well. Okay. Well.
So the definition would stay in.
So yeah, we'll keep the definition, and
so
after all that work you did, Dean, which is really great,
it's good for
not do anything.
wrapping a head around.
It'll be helpful for the next discussion, I think, about this, 'cause
Don't lose these.
Yeah, right.
We'll be
Right.
busting that out again.
Okay. The next topic is a lot more straightforward. I just jinxed it. So so the Historic Preservation and Design Review Commission and their role in helping to streamline approvals a little bit. Do you have an eloquent intro to this? Or?
Well, I can just do a quick little intro. The idea is that under Section 1530 of the regs right now, every application that is within the district goes from the Planning and Zoning Office to this group we call the HBDRC, the Historic Preservation and Design Review folks. They make a recommendation, and that recommendation goes to the DRB a week later, usually. And then the DRB goes, oh, well, that's the recommendation? Okay, we approve. And then once that happens, the permit for whatever it is can be issued. And this means big projects and it means little projects. The proposed change that has been suggested would modify that process. And I should say, the same consultant who helped with the form-based zoning is the person who helped me understand that it was because of some changes in the state law that allowed what I'm about to show you became possible. It didn't register with me that when the law changed, and it used to be written in a way that basically mandated that process that I described. When the law changed, it said that it could be different. And so now the idea is that if a project is a small project, and by small, we mean something that doesn't have to go to the DRB anyway, and the things that go to the DRB are conditional uses and site plans or PUDs, just projects that have multiple facets. But things like fences and signs and small additions, those don't have to go to the DRB except for the fact that it's in the district, and the way things are now, everything goes to the DRB. So this proposed amendment would modify this section 1530.2 that says, right now it says that, you know, the HPDRC shall forward a written recommendation to the DRB. It would be changed to say, or to the administrative officer when it can meet this new section, section 1535. And so that would be inserted, and it would be this allowance for administrative review in case of minor projects. This was not the most artfully drafted section, but the group thought it got the job done. And it basically says that the other language notwithstanding, certain qualifying activities may be administratively approved by the zoning administrator upon issuance of the positive recommendation from this group when there are these qualifying activities. And then those qualifying activities are defined as alterations or additions to a single family or two-family home, construction or installation of a single family or two-family home, a temporary sign, fully conforming permanent sign, minor modifications to things that had been approved before, and minor alterations to non-residential buildings or site, which when the group says that they think that it doesn't need to go to the DRB, then they would approve it. And it also is written to say basically that if they want to send something to the DRB, they can. So that's the essence of it. Make the process simpler. It saves the applicant time because they don't have to wait an additional week. And then there's also one aspect of this that I should point out, that because when things go to the DRB, there is a delay because of a notification requirement, and that's something else that's relatively new. And so the process will be dramatically simplified, and it will be a lot more like what someone does outside of the district. They just come in and they get the permit. With this, they would come in, get the permit, but they would also get this input from the HBDRC. And the HBDRC just wants that opportunity to give that input.
Can you talk about the appeals process a little bit? If this were to move forward and the zoning administrator denied the permit, how does the applicant appeal that?
Well, it'd be the same way as anything else.
Goes to the DRB?
Yeah. And the thing is that the idea is that the only circumstance that would cause the zoning administrator to deny it would be a negative recommendation. So the way I think this will work is as a practical matter is the zoning administrator will say, I understand that you want it the way that you want it, but because they've recommended against it, I'm going to deny it, and you can try your luck with the DRB, and it's just going to take more time. Or you could have another meeting with the HBDRC, and maybe there can be a meeting of the minds, and they'll give you a positive recommendation, and when they do that, then I can sign the permit. But long story short, if the person who's signing the permit says denied, it would go to the DRB.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, any action by the person that signs the permits is appealable to the DRB.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Helps save time and
Yeah, for sure.
fewer steps. Okay. So,
DRB's gonna owe us. Saving them all this extra
Are
work.
we keeping tabs?
it's a slippery slope, man. All right, well, so that, like, it sounds like there's agreement that that is okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Do we need to vote on it or anything, or is that?
No, goes into the next step is the warning of hearings.
Yeah, so the possibility of warning the hearings, and that really hinges on having a clear idea of what the document that would be warned for public hearing is, and I thought I had this up here. So,
Well, and while you're looking that up, there were two warnings in here. One would be to pass the form-based zoning amendments forward, which there's some discussion around that because I know you had added a note in there that we should all be square with the amended version that you've annotated,
yeah, so they're, right.
and which completely makes sense. And I know that was something that hasn't been in a packet. It was just linked to, and we've had it up on the screen a couple times.
And you also have paper colored copies right here now.
Oh, right on.
So this is
Cool.
This is the paper version of the document that was online that was called the kind of proto hearing draft, and it's the simplified version of what I've been keeping as a running document all along. So it's it doesn't have as many things in it as I'm not sure that it even matters, but this is what I would hopefully walk people through so that it could be understood that if you voted to warn the public hearing, then there wouldn't be any question about what is going to be, how the document's going to be edited and distributed. Because keep in mind that the hearing would take place in about a month. The document that is the subject of the hearing would have to be on the street 15 days before. So that gives me 15 days basically to make sure that the document, that all of the words and the changes that you agree on are reflected in a document, okay? And so that's why I want to show you this, so that if I put that out on the street, there wouldn't be something that someone would say, well, no, we didn't, that wasn't what we had thought.
Right.
That makes sense.
And so, I mean, some of these things are like the note at the top, we want to make sure that it's consistent, character districts, capital C, capital D. And so that will happen throughout the document. 2019 plan, blah, blah, blah. Now, there was one thing that I wanted to mention. Some of these are renumbering this adult entertainment uses. This was something that I had mentioned, that amendment to the form-based zoning that happened in 2017. This was the only change that was made. It was done in alignment with the adult entertainment stuff, and Brandy's document never included that, so this is going to be inserted. But there is one instance here, build to zone occupancy. I just highlighted it here. The wording doesn't match page 11, and I had the wording from page 11 in the box below. It's something that I caught, didn't, it's not critical, but I just was going to mention it. There essentially two kind of not exactly matching descriptions.
So you're proposing the one in the box?
I'm wondering if that number 7 in the right-hand column shouldn't be changed correct so that it would read what is in that box rather than what is there.
In the
Because
box
you
makes a
use
lot more
that
sense
box
to me.
version on page 11.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's clear.
And that was the one that we spent a fair amount of time around as well. I think I would default to what's on page 11.
Okay. And so, a lot of the changes it was just striking things and inserting words. So if we go to the next page, there's no change to the illustrating plan. This version of the regulating plan that you find, actually, I've already edited. I've taken out that frontage zone, so there are only 2 frontage zones in this now. And I also edited the little versions of the images that were in the character district descriptions, so the frontage zone is gone. So there's some minor tweaks there, but the next edit doesn't show up until page 9, and that's fairly basic stuff where instead of, it just says as stated in section, and
Putting in the right
it
section.
didn't get, there was a missing phrase, and it was really supposed to be figure 22. So that would be a change.
From just considering time and seeing where we're going, I love, if we could get through this now, that'd be amazing. But question from, if we were to warn the hearing, that's got to be a 30-day or so in advance, somewhere around there.
Right. It's 15 days is minimum, but then there are things that prevent it from being I can't put it in the paper tomorrow.
Right. So, but I mean, so roughly say there's that. But
Yeah, my recommendation was November 14th.
Right, and 15 to actually have the hearing.
The hearing would be, so that's a bit more than 30 days.
Right, and this would need to be publicly posted 15 days before that.
It would have to be available on the street, and to the absolute minimum time would be 15 days.
Because what I'd love to just go through this with the overview that you're doing
But
right
if there's
now.
a way around it,
Well, not even a way around it. I'm just thinking because there are, we have Kate's out as well, and she may have some inputs.
yep.
The idea of warning for that hearing to be on the 14th tonight, with the idea that then commissioners could do a deeper dive comparing to previous notes and all of that stuff if needed, and providing feedback by a certain date so that you could have that document updated for the publicly required availability.
Yeah, I would say that you might be able to do it that way. It's just the possibility is, well, what happens if things fall apart and you don't manage to get it all together? And if people can go through it, and there's possibility, if there's the consensus that's understood now, and there can be a phone meeting held in 2 weeks or no one has to take much time out of their schedule, but it's legally warned, and there's the meeting, and at that time, we've settled on the text, we've got it all vetted, and the motion is made. I would prefer that, or I would recommend that, rather than having a situation where you've made a motion to warn a public hearing on a draft that's still not quite over the finish line.
And that's fair. I mean, if the intention is to go through, it's, our tendencies when we go through documents, things
Yeah.
that look like they could take X amount of time, take X cubed amount
Yep.
of time. So, all right, well, we can keep going through this. I just also wanted to make sure we got through the rest of the
Yeah,
agenda
I mean,
items.
the pain, it's painful, but the other thing about this is that some of these things will take a little bit of time if they're actually carried out, because, for example, the editing some of the annotations
Some
of
of
the
the-
graphics, they're going to be a
yes.
bit of a pain.
Right.
So on page,
Okay.
and I hope it goes fairly quickly. On page 9, it was that figure reference rather than a section. On page 11, it's inserting that meets the requirements. Page 13, changing case of letters. Page 15, that's just cleaning up the document so that the annotations would be retyped, and that happens on a couple of pages. That brings us into a place where there could be some discussion. This is the building types, and there are those graphics that have all of those letters and not all the letters are used. So I'll make an attempt to remove those letters that aren't used. But one of the open questions had to do with this change in the ground floor finished elevation, where I think that there was an across-the-board agreement to change those 1 foot minimums to 0 foot minimums.
Yeah, I recall we okayed changing all that to 0.
Yeah.
I can't honestly remember the number. I remember lowering them all.
To allow for handicapped access to
Yeah.
any building.
Right, for some reason townhouse is sticking in my head that we had maybe that was slightly elevated, but I don't know.
Yeah, in the townhouse type, it would be going from 2 to 0, not 1 to 0.
Yeah, I think that this is not something I would lose sleep over. I think our discussion though is that for townhouse, just based on the design, was we were gonna keep it at 1 because that was part of the aesthetics of townhouse would have a step up to it or something.
Yeah.
Perfectly happy with 0, and I suspect that if a developer were to do that, it would not be at a base level entry anyway.
0 is the minimum.
It's right, it's
minimum,
the,
it's
the
not
low
the-
end of the range.
right.
I think the
And-
discussion was around maintaining some aesthetic.
And just so people sitting in the audience know what it is we're talking about, it's these pages with the building types on it where there are some extraneous letters that aren't referenced over here, and then this change in there's one of these standards, which is the ground floor finished elevation. There's a minimum and a maximum, and in most cases, those are being changed from a 2 foot or a 1 foot minimum to a 0 minimum.
Above grade.
And that happens, again, on the next page, page 19, and I'd be editing to remove the letters. The page with cottage courts, there were more edits, and there are some of them that are just me saying, you didn't actually come out and say, add the letters that are in those graphics over on the left-hand side, but I can. And so I was going to. And try to clean up the graphics and then remove the ones that are not used. And in this particular case,
Yes.
ground floor elevation, it would be a 2 to 0.
Yes.
And the next building type is the live-work unit. That just had those extraneous letters issues. And then we get into, yeah, so there's something that I believe was a comment of the group. That would be to change where there was a reference to CUP, and that really should say conditional use approval. That's here. And continuing on. The next change, these are all related to the letters being extraneous. So the place where it starts getting significant, I guess I would say more significant, is on page 28, where we get into standards. And there are some corrected figure references. So I did have one note in the center column on page 28. I wrote a box that said specs conflict, or meant it to be specs conflicts. This is maybe more of a heads up that it's not an edit, But something that will need to be addressed at some point is as the public works specifications get updated, and there's a process going on right now, I think there could be some fairly serious conflicts with what the form-based zoning is trying to do. So it's really more of a everybody needs to keep aware of that, because this group doesn't control the specs. Some of the things that the specs do may undermine what the form-based zoning is trying to do. And so on the right hand,
Should we be being more proactive about being engaged with that conversation?
it is one of the short answer is yes, and the plan talks about that, and the question is just going to be how do processes that are used currently change so that there are more people that get involved in it, because it's been a fairly internal process in the past. But the plan has a lot of language that says it should be more open, basically. The right-hand side, right-hand column on page 28, it's got a question mark, but I believe there was this consensus to develop the waiver for right-of-way width. That had been settled upon. Next page.
That sounds familiar.
Sorry, to go back to the specs conflicting, is there anything, while we're going through, if we're going to warrant a hearing and make these changes, is there anything we can do to help? We know there's going to be a conflict that we can do to head it off here,
I
or
don't
somehow
think
make it?
I can't. No, I think because it's too early. It's not like the specs are in a draft, but I have a pretty strong sense
Okay.
that things could change. So as an example, right now the specs call for sidewalks to be concrete, 5 feet wide. It's a standard everywhere you see it. The current highway staff don't evidently feel concrete has advantages, and they would be, it sounds like they would be prepared to change the specification to asphalt, which has very different characteristics. It doesn't speak urban or the type of design or character that a lot of what form-based zoning is talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty significant one. It's not in a proposal per se yet, but it could be the kind of thing that happened.
Okay.
Okay,
Fun conversation.
Yeah.
page 29, let's see. That just has a figure reference. Page 30, figure references. Starting on page 31, we get into the street types, and there were some things about just taking out some of the parts of that aren't really used, so I'm just going to be editing the graphics to mask out those parts. Going on to page 32, there were some, there's an incomplete reference at the very top in the header. It's kind of an esoteric thing, but that was a catch I think Neil made, so we'd be adding BL after 30.
Love it. Gold star.
And then if we go on page 34, we would be striking BL. And then there's a place where a couple of words are struck. If there are no questions, page 35, low impact development would be spelled out. Page 36, I don't think there's anything. Page 37, the footer will be corrected. I think that was another Neil, although maybe it was someone else. Someone with eagle eyes. Page 38, some numerical, there were the changes in numbers having to do with parking that were agreed to. Low impact development being spelled out. Page 39, page 40, some words deleted. Paragraph at the top right-hand side having to do with street side parking, that was deleted. That takes us to the next changes found on page 42. Deleting some spaces, updating some numbers, confirming, doing consistent capitalization, that's been mentioned before. spelling out low-impact development, inserting some words in the middle column. That's on page 43. If I'm going too fast, just shout.
Good.
Page 44, some words being deleted in those two columns. 45, correcting some numerical references, spelling out some things, correcting the numbers in the subparagraphs. Oh yeah, subparagraphs rather than subparagraph, singular. Revising the wording in 2205 in the third column on the bottom of right-hand side of page 45. You came up with some wording there. All buildings in the SRFO BOD should strive to achieve a goal of zero net energy through best practices, etc. That was, so then 46, this is getting to be fairly recent in time, so people probably remember these. Thermal envelope power systems would be inserted. Wind power systems revised to read renewable energy for heat and cooling. Revised to have dual flush toilets and waterless urinals, inserting some commas in the middle. On page 47, some revision to the wording having to do with signs and lighting. And changing of to over under the left-hand side, 2/3 of the way down. So then there was one place, so underlit to uplit. Was that agreed to ultimately? Right-hand side, page 47.
I thought it was because underlit has other meanings.
I
to
think
it.
the idea was that it would be changed, but it's still an issue that people wanted to come back to.
Seems like a
So,
Yeah, it was impartial.
okay, so underlit,
underlit's like what happens in my kitchen cabinets, right?
Or else you don't have enough light,
Right.
and that's underlit.
You want to uplight that canopy.
Yeah, I'd say uplit is the word.
uplit was the
Uplit makes
consensus.
sense.
Yeah. So page 48, there were some revisions on the left-hand side. The wording is in that box. Yeah, I think this was one of Megan's suggestions, and you made it read more clearly. And then the middle column, number 4, was deleted because I think it said the same thing as something that was said before. It was redundant. And if we can move to 49, there was nothing there. The highlighting on page 50 was not intended to be in the final document. It was just something else that needed to be cleaned up. In previously developed sites, this is starting on page 51. Those were all agreed to, inserting some text.
Wait a second, on 50, was that the highlighted text is, was there something that was going to change around that? Just wording?
It wasn't a change that was going to be made. I think I had meant to clean it up, but I hadn't cleaned it up.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that's all good.
So the previous developed sites, inserting a missing word, inserting compliance with the stormwater management requirements, and I will spell requirements correctly when I do edit it. Deleting extra periods. And that brings us to page 52. There were some letter case issues, some spelling issues. Now, the thing about, the note about parking lot for figure 2206, that's just the fact that it is something that you wanted to take back. I should have deleted parking lot. That wasn't, nothing needs to be happening with that right now. And page 53, that highlighted part, that again was something that I just meant to delete but didn't.
Delete the highlight or delete the text?
To delete the highlight, sorry. there wasn't, I'll fix the unintended highlighting that's left on 54 under the administrative stuff, and that brings us to 55. And that's where this inserting width of right-of-way was added to the table as one of the deviations that would be allowed by waiver. And there was also an incorrect reference where it says 2205.4 should be 2205.3. Okay, and there wasn't anything on page 56. And then the definitions, home stretch. There was some editing of alley. We took out the reference to rear, so alleys may, it wasn't should. Then the addition of the reference to permeable paving in there. The definition of building envelope got reworked. The definition of building lot got reworked. The definition of construction got reworked at Stephen's suggestion.
Construction sign, yeah.
And there wasn't, oh yeah, there were some little things at the bottom of page 58 inserted that were asked for, and there was some words deleted that were really kind of unnecessary in the path. And that takes us to page 59, where principal frontage got changed to primary frontage, and then there was that phrase added to the beginning, or that sentence, I should say, added to the beginning, which defined what it was generally, and then the remainder was the situation on corner lots. There was a missing comma in public frontage. The word primary was changed to secondary. That was another good catch I think Jason got on the secondary facade, where there must have been a copy and paste error because it says primary, but it should say secondary. That question mark that's next to street.
Is there a missing question mark?
No, there's no missing question mark, but this is reflecting my earlier comment, so you can scratch that. You can also scratch the, well, the further discussion, you've had your further discussion, and you're leaving 12.
Wow.
And so if you were to say that would be those changes, if you can now use that.
And so just because I felt like I kind of came into it in the middle of all of this, the document that we had been editing these last few meetings, this is based on the changes that Brandy had made to the original.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna have a red line to the original. Is that true, or are we gonna have a red line to the original?
So what I'm going to be doing, to the greatest extent possible, is I'm either going to be working with her document, and I'm going to be renting a license for InDesign and making the edits in InDesign, so that the version that reflects these changes will look kind of like she had done it. That's my hope, and it will be a situation where we say, here are the existing regulations, and here's the new proposal, and we're sorry, there's not a red line version between the two, because one was done in one way, and the other one was done in this new way. It's kind of like what happened with the comprehensive plan, where things had changed so dramatically, there wasn't a red line comparison.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So I have a question that, and I don't want to restart lots of discussions, but when I was going back through my messier version of these edits, the taking out the Martindale spot seemed like the most substantial change we made. And that was pretty early on in the discussion. And I just kind of wanted to bring that up because it seemed,
Taking out the node?
yeah, taking out that Martindale note and looking at this picture, which if we are with the node gone, this picture seems like it on page 2 kind of still includes that.
Wait.
I mean, I think the orange dotted line includes a larger section, which would, I don't know if that needs to change or not. It feels like it was the most substantial sort of policy change we made to this, where the rest was edits. And it was maybe my second or third meeting, and I think it was in response to my concern about too much building going on here. But I kind of wanted to raise it to make sure that it's something that we're all still comfortable with, makes sense. And also I was thinking about the developer who came in for I've been driving by it the last week thinking about it, the Champlain Lanes turning into housing, because that will still happen, right? They can get that approved under the existing thing. These won't
Conventional
impact
zoning
theirs.
would just mean fewer units.
Well, they said they wouldn't do it under conventional zoning. So
Right.
what I'm wondering is if they've already gotten it approved under what we have.
They don't have anything
There's
approved.
no approval.
Okay.
They were coming to us at a very preliminary, I mean, they
Stage.
had multiple sketches, but it was to show that they really wanted to use form-based zoning for the advantages they could get with density, but there were certain things like first floor retail use in that
yeah.
area and other things that are included in these revisions, so they're interested in having these amendments go forward. The orange line, though.
Well, it's sort of a larger zone. I guess I don't know. I go back and forth on it, that it feels like a major change like that is maybe part of the larger discussion of what we want to get out of all of this and what the goal is, rather than smaller edits. But I wanted to raise it because I don't have a.
I thought it was a good move to take out, like on the next page, which shows
Yeah.
it deleted on page 3. Just because too many nodes, it was a good move.
Complicates
Too
it.
many nodes makes it seem like, are there any nodes at all, or is it just one big mega
Which is
node?
what this orange line is, right?
Yeah, but I
Mega
think
node.
that's generally defining the mixed-use street area.
Okay.
But I think the more specific one, the regulating plan, shows what's actually, on page 3,
Yeah.
shows what's actually part of that. Or-
So- Are you thinking about that the regulating plan would be becoming inconsistent or less consistent with the illustrative plan? And that's, or is it just this basic idea, are we really sure we want to change the regulating plan and remove that third frontage zone at the top?
Yeah, I guess just more to raise it, and it might be that at that point I was so new to all of this that you all had a better sense of it at the time than I did coming around to it. But just going through the edits, that seemed like the one big change to me, and it felt like it happened very quickly.
So everybody knows the things that, this is the way that the document is right now with these frontage zones. There's one here at this Martindale intersection and one here, and the revision takes the northern one out. But you're not sure that you're comfortable with that, and does the group as a whole want to continue with that recommendation? Or
As I understood it, that was sort of driven by, that was driven by that discussion from the folks from the bowling lane. And there was some discussion about heights and the retail uses and that sort of thing.
I don't think
True? No?
I think
Yeah.
that's just trying to get enough of a modulating thing happening on the road. And it seems like that frontage zone that we took out really just changes how close to the street you could put your building.
well,
Doesn't really change
the big
density
change
or
is
all
active
that.
ground floor uses.
Yeah, if you're,
Okay.
Oh,
so if you're in one of those nodes, yes, there is a different setback range. It can get you a little bit closer, but the main point of contention was that if you're in one of those nodes, it required a first floor active retail use.
And that was
Okay.
that was their concern. That was one of the
Right,
issues
I
they
mean,
brought
for
up. Wasn't
them,
the
it
only
wouldn't be
issue
a
they-
thing, but them-
it's one of the issues they brought up.
And you're right, because it was around the time of those discussions, because looking at that specific lot, the way that it's split, I mean, I'm sure that there is some creative use that could go in there, but when looked at holistically and looking across the street, you have Route 7 Liquors and the Small Boat Exchange, and that launched into this is why having some inputs from economic development would be really helpful to know if, you know, would those property owners, do they have any thoughts of selling? Are the neighbors interested in that kind of thing? All of that fed into that discussion.
And it's not like you couldn't put in first floor active retail without
If you
the
wanted
node
to.
there, but the node required that. I'm
That
asking.
is, yeah, this is the off the top of my head is not going to work, so.
Like I said, I'm not trying to necessarily
Please, though, it's,
upend the whole thing, but this was the one piece that I didn't feel like I had a clear thing on, and it felt like the biggest change.
So, if it helps, I would say that maybe one of the other changes that rivals that in significance is the language that has to do with how you deal with already existing sites. Because, as an example, this conversation is bringing into focus the property just to the north. You have the mobile home park, you have the bowling alley property, you have what some people know as Shelburne Bay Senior Living, that's this. And this site, under conventional zoning, the old conventional zoning, is maxed out in terms of density. And there wouldn't ever be anything in this front part. And this is also a weird property because it's a 99-year lease. This is the old drive-in theater site. And under form-based zoning, this site will change a lot in terms of its potential, but in terms of its ownership, I don't think it's ever going to be split. So it kind of, where am I going with this? I'm going with this that it may be that this is an intersection where, you know, the mobile home park, it's in a co-op, it's not going to be redeveloped, so it's not going to take advantage of the frontage zone. You know, form-based zoning won't be used to change this. And I think the same thing would be the case with Shelburne Bay Senior Living. When it came to the bowling alley property, when people were looking at this illustrative plan, the idea was that there would be an additional building in the front, but the building in the back would stay. I think we've had this conversation of, does this work with just one side of the street involved? And I guess I'm saying that on the west side, there are a lot of holes that I don't know that they will ever be filled.
I think that's
That-
what had us zero in on that particular node to say.
And that also, that resonates with me in terms of the house. I don't like the idea of forcing housing into a position that's less than optimal for the residents just to meet a node. So that makes sense.
And that also, if I understand, that property hasn't been locked in for that they
Not to
haven't-
my knowledge.
Right. And part of them coming was to say, hey, we have this thought, we'd like to do this, we'd like to use form-based, we can't currently, would you consider removing that active floor use, which happened to be there because of that node location, and then as we got into it and looked at what else was there.
Yeah. I part of what I was wondering is if it was going to happen under the node because this wouldn't go through in time, and then we took away the node and then you had part of it done. But this all answers my question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
never
for
feel
bringing
bad
that
about
up.
Yeah,
asking
I-
those
I-
things. It's important.
Appreciate the
I think
opportunity
I
to talk
was-
through it again.
Yeah,
Still learning the ropes. I still am, but particularly in that discussion.
you aren't alone.
So you're not up to speed yet.
I'm amazed that we got through that as quickly as we did. Thank you. Well, so having done that and recognizing that if anybody did want to go through with the fine-tooth comb kind of thing, or Kate as well, there could always be inputs sent to you in a reasonable time frame. I wouldn't anticipate any. That was good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is just to be able to say with a, straight face and good conscience that there's a consensus with the majority of the group right now on what this thing will say, and the document can always be amended before it's sent to the select board, and that's where if people said, oh, we all, if you just slap our foreheads, there was this one thing we all agreed, and here it is on tape, and we go, yep, and we just add that in whatever goes to the select board.
Right. But I agree with you. Best to say,
Here's where
a majority with quorum has said we're ready to move this forward, and there will be opportunities
And we've been
to
through it.
ask questions, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, would somebody like to make that motion?
I'll do that.
That's it, all right.
I move to direct staff to warn a public hearing to be held on November 14th, 2019 regarding amendment of the zoning bylaw. The amendment, if enacted, would modify the following: regulating plan, building form and lot development standards, public realm standards, parking, landscaping, screening and lighting standards, sustainable design, signage standards, previously developed sites, and definitions, as reflected in documents previously distributed and hereby approved for discussion at public hearing.
All in favor?
Was there a second?
Yeah, you want
I'll
a second?
second that.
All right, seconded by, all right. Motion by Steven, seconded by Neil, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And I've been seeing Steve nodding too, so we're good.
Do we have to do the
The bylaw
second
change
one?
report, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Should I just continue on with that?
Yeah.
On a roll here. I move to approve the associated zoning change report dated October 10th, 2019, and direct staff to distribute said report and copies of the amendment proposal as required by statute.
Second that.
Moved by Steven, seconded by Neil, all in favor? Aye. Okay,
And I wasn't sure how things were going to play out, so I've got everything I did a mirror version for the HPDRC.
and I think we should do that as well, as long as the select board is well aware that these are not attached. Which-
Right, and that's the other benefit is that they can move forward independently.
Right. You still feeling it?
I'm done.
You're done?
Yeah.
All right, who else?
It's Megan's turn.
All right, I'll do it. I move to direct staff to warn a public hearing to be held on November 14th, 2019 regarding amendment of the zoning bylaw. The amendment, if enacted, would simplify the application and review procedure for certain minor projects proposed within the Historic Preservation and Design Review Overlay, as reflected in documents previously distributed and hereby approved for discussion at public hearing.
Second.
Moved by Megan, seconded by Steven, all in favor?
Aye. Okay. I move to approve the associated zoning change report dated October 10th, 2019, and direct staff to distribute said report and copies of the amendment proposal as required by statute.
Moved by Megan,
Second.
seconded by Neil, all in favor? Okay,
Thank you.
Wow.
That's good.
Thanks.
that was a lot of meetings to get to that point on the form-based zone amendment. Thank you for everybody's patience. Okay, and the bylaw change reports looked really good as well. Thank you, Dean.
Sure.
For that. There was one tiny nitpicky thing on page 3 of the,
The bylaw change report?
yeah.
The one we just approved.
Well, they just-
It's not a thing. It's more, I didn't know if this came from somewhere else, but there was just a repetition of 2 words. Didn't matter.
The
Anyway,
words are in twice.
Yeah.
I can clean it up.
it's not a material change.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so those are there, and then moving on to planning matters with the maps from the town plan.
Yeah. This has been in your packets without getting much discussion a few times, and it shouldn't take long to explain, but the idea has been to do a cleanup amendment to the document and fix some problems. This is just a series of images that are windowing in on parts of the plan. The way that the plan is right now, this is the map 2 planning areas. As you can see, this red box is the area down near Teddy Bear, and the green is conservation. And it's clearly not conservation land. You have the building, you have the south area, and then this north area, which is where the building is and where you were talking with the folks earlier. I have an idea of why the data ended up getting colored this way when Pam made the maps, and we could fix it, and she's actually already fixed it. So it would turn yellow.
So that was an error that was made?
Well, so the data that she's been using has a designation in it that is like association lands or something like that. It basically means lands that are common and somewhat separated from buildings, and the data, the source data, has that land as opposed to the buildings in that association category. And typically the association lands are that they do meet the conservation category, but in some cases they don't. And this isn't the only one, so we'll see some other examples. But that's why. It wasn't like anybody deliberately said, oh, those are conservation lands. It's because just along with all of the other association parcels, they were turned green. And no one was thinking, oh, well, wait, some of those association lands may actually be those rare instances where it's the land that's like this, and it doesn't really deserve to be turned green.
And this is addressed in text along with the maps in the town plan, but it also ruffled some feathers because, I mean, at a glance,
I mean, it really
it's not
doesn't
correct,
make
yeah.
sense to show it as conservation land because it's just so far removed.
And the other two red boxes?
So here, this is a place that there are duplexes, and it's the same situation where there are buildings and then there's land, and the land had this association categorization, and they got turned green, and they really shouldn't be. So if I zoomed in, so that's not conservation land. It's the land surrounding a duplex, and then there's also another duplex over here on Thomas Road.
Is that really conservation land, the other green section, just between the two boxes?
Yeah, right.
'Cause isn't that where- aren't
this
there
is the
developments
open
in there?
space for the development. Yeah, so
I
that
walk
begs
by
that
there a lot.
question. There are places where there are open space lands. See, this is the challenge that we have is cases where there are open space lands that are parts of parcels, and the whole parcels are being treated one way rather than the parcels actually being split. Yeah, so that's a good point.
Yeah, there's
So,
condos and then
yeah.
there's
This is-
the terraces are there too.
yeah, so this issue came up when it was decided kind of last minute to add to the planning areas maps the information that was from the open space plan. Because really where this started was in the open space plan where there were a lot of areas that were shown as green. And so I'm not even having the conversation with you about how there need to be corrections made to the maps in the open space plan, but that's where these really started. So we were going to try to fix them here, but yes, it's not limited, but there are some open space components. That's the difference between these. These are entirely, and they're not an open space component. There is some, so it's making the problem smaller, but it isn't removing it entirely.
And the maps wouldn't be driving the regulatory discussion anyway.
Not really, because they're already developed sites and.
Right, it's more a reference.
Yeah, I mean, the single greatest problem that was seen with the map is the miscoding of teddy bear and fixing that problem. But we should fix the problem wherever it exists. It's just that some cases are like really clear and then others are more on the boundary because there are parts of those parcels that are open space and it could arguably qualify for the green status.
Aren't they relatively small areas that are open space on those? Because those.
I don't remember what the
There's a lot of
percent.
buildings on.
Yeah, I don't
those
remember
other
what
two.
the percentages are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, can we?
Yeah.
Is there a problem with adding those things to the yellow?
Well,
Right
I'm just trying to think for a second. Yellow, right. It wouldn't, in my mind, it wouldn't be a problem to make them yellow, in my mind. Because
I lean towards
essentially,
a more stringent definition of conservation land, so if somebody's looking, you can actually see what's conserved and what's not, because if you're,
and when the decision was
Pushing for
made
more.
to
Yeah.
put them on, it was, I think, a little bit rushed, and it was everything. There were things that were included in the conservation category that hadn't been considered conservation in plans in the past. And that's where, in the old plans, we wouldn't have considered any of this association stuff at all as being green. I mean, we wouldn't have gone there. It would have been lands that have easements at a higher level of protection than what you see here.
I'd be in favor of turning that yellow as well. It just like you're saying, Megan, it skews our perception. We say, wow, look at all the conservation land, and that has the same kind of conservation weight as does the La Platte River Nature Park up on the top, and that's clearly not
not the same.
the same, or even close.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion around what to include in there based on,
And maybe what this
Trying to
points
remember.
out is that, because, like I said, this had been in your packets for a while, and they had never gotten to talk about it, and now it's turning out to be like 3-4 months old, and maybe the thing to do is to step back and show you, because I thought this is just going to be easier to zero in on those spots that the problems were identified, and people said fix those. Maybe it's step back and ask yourself the larger question of what should the threshold be for what is turned on as green. I think that would be a good thing to have, but it's going to take longer.
Could it be a discussion that we have with, when we meet with the Natural Resources Committee? Would that be
I think it would be a good topic
Logical.
to have that conversation with them. Yeah.
have there been any, I mean, I know we had preliminary discussions, like Teddy Bear had questions about this, and it was always said, hey, we're gonna have an amendment package and we'll make sure this gets cleaned up. Has there been pressure with any timeline on that?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Yeah, if there isn't, and we could clear up some other areas with this as well, that would be good. I think in the beginning there was some pressure to just say, yes, we have an amendments package coming. This is going to be in there. It's also one of those things where in certain areas, the more you dig, the more you might come up, and where do you want to draw the line? But certainly worth it if it's something to do a first pass over and say if this is something we could easily change and there's good reason for it, let's do it.
Yeah. I don't have materials in your packets so that you're anywhere close to warning a hearing. I think this is good getting it back on the
Right.
schedule, and so maybe it's next time or maybe it's not, but you can figure out when you would like it back and in what form.
Well, and after the archaeologically sensitive areas map, that's the next topic.
Yep.
Before we close out.
That's right. And the background on that for folks is that when the plan was put together, we understood that there was this old archaeological sensitivity map that was out of date, and I was working with the state archaeologist to get a new map created, and he was suffering from staff shortages, and we ended up creating this map that is not strictly speaking an archaeological sensitivity map, but it was really more of a placeholder, and he finally came through with what is more of the traditional sensitivity map, and so that's what this is the prototype for. Pam Brangan has the data. This is a graphic mock-up that wasn't produced by Pam, but what she would be creating will look substantially like this. And actually, the number of categories I think I have is, I did things incorrectly, and I think it may be 7 or 8, so the color scheme will be a little bit more extended.
All right.
So how, if somebody wanted to develop one of those sites, how does that affect them? Is this like a binding thing? Like if they're in the red right there,
Well, they're not in the
They-
regs. So, I mean, this is one of the maps that's in the plan.
yeah.
And like previous plans have done, there have been a lot of different resources shown on maps in the plan. There are different policy statements that refer to the maps that are in the plan, and they're often aspirational, or they say, you know, work this map into some kind of regulation. So the question would be, someday, the map could have a role in a set of regulations. Now, I can't tell you how they would be used. I don't think that it would be seen. This is a fairly coarse modeling of archaeological sensitivity, so I don't think there would be a consensus to say, you know, if it's in category 4 or higher, you don't get to build. I mean, that's not what I would imagine people using a map like this for.
Just to make people aware that there might be.
Well, I'm not saying that it couldn't end up in the regulations in some fashion, but I don't think it would be kind of binary. It may be something that could be worked into a system where development gets more units, the more resources it acknowledges and somehow protects. And so it's like Williston, their rural development regs have a scoring system. So maybe the regs would use a map like this to award points or pull away points, depending on, you know, two developments, all else being equal, one that avoids gets more points than one that doesn't, something like that.
What is this data based on? Like, where do all these points?
So the Division for Historic Preservation in Vermont has had an archaeological sensitivity model for a number of years, and Vermont's not alone. Archaeologists will often use these models. I'm trying to remember how many different factors there are in the state's model. Maybe something like 20, and it includes things like watercourse, you know, proximity to watercourses, land cover. It's got a bunch of things in it, and I'm not going to be able to rattle it off the top of my head, but it is a predictive model, or yeah, it's a model that is used.
So this is not like, people have reported they were doing some excavating here and they unearthed the bone, and so
No,
they
well,
called it
that
red.
see,
It's not
so
that.
this map is more of that type of map. So the map that's shown here is showing sites, and this model is showing there's some of this where the sites actually are found incorporated in this. I think if we were able to do an overlay, we would see some of that. But this goes way beyond this by incorporating the layers of the factors that research has shown are associated with the presence of
Gotcha.
archaeological resources. And a lot of it has to do with water courses. A lot of it has to do with water courses and water bodies. I mean, just, you know, Shelburne has some really striking archaeological sites. There was a site out on Shelburne Point where it's an archaic site. It's between 6,000 and 7,000 years old. There is an important archaeological site over north of Shelburne Pond that, you know, one of the, something that's a part of archaeology is animal burial, and there's a dog burial site, and evidently there's a lot of research having to do with how ancient cultures lived with dogs and the role of the dogs. And so there's one of those. I mean, so there's some cool stuff, archaeologically speaking. Job.
Got some reading ahead of you.
Thanks, Jason.
And there is I have a hard time reading it, but there's a link to that as well that I was going to follow up on. It is interesting stuff.
It's also an interesting idea to link like density, sort of what we did in the form-based zoning, to things that you want to achieve. So it could be sensitivity to something like this, or it could be stormwater, or whatever environmental factors you want to. You could link it to different things.
Yeah.
Then, and this is something where the newer map would replace the placeholder. that
That's
we put
the
in there.
expectation, yep.
So then the last one is,
Well, this
Beaver
was
Creek?
just that issue having to do with the
Spears.
comprehensive plan, future plan map relies on the stormwater service area, SSA, sewer service area, I'm sorry, sewer service area boundary, and that's what's shown here, and that's been incorporated into the plan map, it's been incorporated into the zoning, but the problem is that that line is wrong, and we had talked about the possibility of making that change, but then there was also the possibility of, well, let's leave the map alone, and instead, one idea would be to add words to the text of the plan where it's addressing the sewer service area and say something like the service boundary should be updated to reflect the boundary of the Beaver Creek development. And then you just leave that as a future task rather than trying to make those edits to all of the maps now.
So is that why it's complicated? You'd said in your notes that it was complicated to do. Is it the number of maps, or is there another factor?
Well, another factor is that the sewer service area map is something that's controlled by the select board. And the way that the plans have been structured in Shelburne the last couple of cycles is that the plan maps follow the sewer service area map. So the question would be, well, how can we reverse that? We should, the flow is from the sewer service area boundary to the plan, and if people believe that's the way that it should flow, then the recommendation would be to say to the select board, hey, update the sewer service area map, and then the plan map will be changed. There's no absolute dependence, but I think that by proposing a change like this, there can at least be a conversation with the select board about fixing problems like this. I don't think that there would be much objection on their part to fix the sewer service area to correct the problem like this. In years past, there have been reasons why that might not have happened, but I don't think those still exist.
This seemed like a logical
Yeah.
solution to me. I was curious what the complications were.
The complications were
makes sense.
that there was a time where there were some people that felt any change at all would not be tolerated because it meant that the door was opened to changes that could become very contentious.
yeah, I think that's a great.
So is next steps for all that to prepare to the next meeting to?
I think that, yeah, so I think that resolve the question of how many more green areas would you want to take off, resolve that, and then, assuming that's all straightened out, then pull the materials together that would be necessary to warn the public hearing. And map out the public hearing schedule. Yeah, and I don't know if you started to talk a little bit about the select board's interest in tamping down packages from the planning commission, and so maybe that enters into it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll historically start getting toward the end of the year, and the budget process is not small, so they tend to really be focused on those types of things. I wouldn't say that should preclude us from sending things to them if we have them ready, but it would also mean that we wouldn't necessarily charge forward to really get something out the door if it's likely not to get attention immediately. Which does bring us to future topics. And first statement is just to make sure, and I think several of you did, but just to make sure that the schedule is updated, the attendance thing, so we know if we're going to have quorum issues or not.
I did it today.
Yeah, I did too.
Seems like we just did all that.
It's almost January. The next big point on this before we get into topics is the schedule for November, because the second Thursday is Thanksgiving. There are a few options. I know there's just 4 of us here, 4.5. But regarding November, in the past, we have had, some years there's just been 1 meeting. In other years, depending on workload and what we want to get through, we'll do 2 and just schedule them differently. In talking with Dean, there is an ideal situation where we could just switch our meetings to the first and the third Thursdays that month, so we'd have them on the 7th and the 21st, which I think would be ideal given some of the material we want to get through. At the same time, I wanted to make sure that that wasn't going to have everybody say can't make one or both, and that doesn't make sense. So if at least the group here, if we could have a quorum on the 7th and the 21st, that would be my suggestion, if we're open to it.
I'm not sure about the 21st for me.
Okay.
I'm not sure about the 7th.
How about you, Steve?
The 21st is definitely good. I'm not sure about the 7th.
Okay.
I think so, but I'm not sure.
All right.
You good for both?
Yeah. Well, you and I are good for both. We don't know about we don't know about Kate. But if she can't make both of the October meetings, there's a good chance that she'd probably
Let's hope.
try and that could balance out. And if not, we could do something similar where we just have like the informal conversation last time we didn't have a quorum. I thought went really well.
Okay.
So is that okay to change them to the 7th and the 21st, and recognizing that we have a couple of missing ones?
Yeah.
All right.
I didn't want to see you in November anyway.
All right. So that solves November.
Now, something else that works into this, I guess, just in terms of overall workload, is the retreat with the SNRCC, and so maybe that is your next area you're going.
Yeah.
Just in terms of people's schedules.
There's that, and depending on when, I don't remember what the dates were looking good for that were, but maybe as a concession we could say maybe in December we just have one meeting, because the second Thursday is day after Christmas. And just any thoughts around that? I am not sure I would be here on the 26th, but and that's not something I would expect anybody to be here for. And trying to reschedule in December starts getting really tricky. And for anybody who's feeling really proactive and wants to see what's going on, the select board would probably welcome all kinds of input around budgets and whatnot. So the preliminary proposal would just be to keep December 12th and cancel the 26th. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any considerations, Dean, around end of year or anything?
I think
might affect
that
anything?
What you're talking about sounds good, and I'm just hoping that the numbers work out.
Yeah.
First and third Thursday, and only one in December.
It's even if one of them doesn't, it'll be a lot better than last year. So we're good. Yeah, we're doing all right. And then on the future topics, I liked for next time. Well, we warned the hearing, so that's out of the way. For now.
So would that make the hearing on the 21st then? Because you
Oh,
were
right.
talking about it on
We
the
just
14th.
warned it.
We've
the
already
14th.
said that
That's
it's going to
true.
be on the 14th. Right? So
Good thinking.
good that you mentioned that.
Because timing-wise, the 7th is too soon then, right?
It's more problematic given that I'm going to it makes it
Thank you,
later.
and don't. I was
So close.
totally missed that.
Yeah, just speaking selfishly, I would, if you're going to meet on the 7th and the 21st, I would prefer to see the amendment or reconsideration of your earlier decision and having it change from 14 to the 21st rather than 14 to the 7th.
Yeah.
Can we just do one meeting in November on the 14th and then do 1st and 3rd in December? It's the same number of meetings either way.
Right. I can do that.
I could do that.
I think so. December's always really hard.
It always
There's
is,
always
yeah.
so much going on.
And this gets into the thing, I mean, we
Right.
plan it out, and if we don't have a quorum, we don't have a quorum, but,
I mean,
yeah.
at this point, yeah, I could do this.
I don't have any conflicts that I know of.
Me neither.
All right, well, that sounds like a better plan then.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll keep the 14th, only have one meeting in November, and then we'll do December 5th and 19th.
And I keep coming back to this reference to the SNRCC and their desire to have a meeting sooner rather than later. And if you were trying to fit that in, the dates that showed up as being strong candidates were as shown October 22nd, 29th, November 5th, and December 3rd.
So 10/29, 11/5, or 12/3?
22nd, 29th, 5th, and 3rd of December
22nd.
for the,
It's the 29th of November, is that? Sorry.
no, 29th of October
Oh, okay.
and 5th of November. So Tuesday nights, first Tuesdays.
I guess I would go for the 5th of November if we only have one meeting in November. Also because I can't do the thing on the 23rd, but I'm going to try to go to Montpelier on the 25th. So that makes October full if we add another thing.
And that's,
The 5th of November works for me too.
I'm good on the 5th.
Yep.
So I can reserve everything and lock it in for the 5th.
Yep.
Okay, good.
All right.
Can you remind me of the time, just so I can put it in right now?
Sorry about the
It's-
time?
Yeah,
When
whatever.
we know when we'd be meeting them during the same, like 7 to 9 at night.
So that has varied a little bit. It started earlier at times.
Yeah, it's usually start time would be no earlier than 6.
Okay.
And I don't know if we do it here or if we do it at the Vineyard again, or
That,
if that's an option.
yeah.
I just wanted to block off an
Yeah.
appropriate, so we
Yeah.
don't lose it if it's set.
So we can get those details out for our next meeting. And I was just looking at notes from what should we prioritize for next topics. A couple of the big things are we have the zoning in the commerce and industry south that I think would be helpful to have some other inputs on, but we had talked about, like you had mentioned, potentially zoning for a restaurant, like having those discussions. I don't know if we'd want to wait to have some additional inputs from economic development or not. We also have the stormwater in the existing regulations, and bringing that up to what we just proposed for the form-based zone.
And Dean already marked those up, right? Or
Ye-
started the process?
We had that in the
Well, there's-
packet, we just didn't
Yeah,
get to
there's
it.
there's a
Yeah.
concept. But I guess one of the questions would be, do you want to start discussing some of that? The stormwater person from South Burlington who helped Shelburne would be willing to come to a meeting. He's come to previous planning commission meetings, so maybe you want to hear from someone like Tom, who can really get into any kind of questions that you have.
I think that would be a good priority to have, especially since we just made that update.
Yeah.
Would that be enough time to have feedback on maps at all? That might be tight.
Might be.
Probably would be tight. Because there was that, and then from some of the topics that I've just been loosely tracking, I don't know that end of year is best, but we had some parking lot items around signage, which also touches on some of the Economic Development Forum feedback that we got, and secondary agriculture. I still want to revisit that at some point, but that might be too soon for that.
I would like to revisit that too.
Yeah, I think, and all of it kind of ties together in a way. I mean, you were part of the conversation when we didn't have a quorum when Ken was here, right? Wait, were you here?
I haven't been here for just
You weren't here. All right. Whoever was here for that.
I was here.
You were here. Yeah. Yeah, it's just really interesting because on one side of Route 7, there's one set of rules, and on the other side.
Right, and that goes to the Southern Commercial District.
It kind of is all tied together. So
and I don't know. I mean, I've heard you say a couple times this evening about sort of getting input from economic development folks, and what I hear you saying is that we need to wait for them for something to happen there, and I'm not quite sure why you feel that way, and we could invite them we could be proactive about that, kind of to your Stephen comments a couple weeks ago. That to me feels like something that's very pressing, and there's some impetus behind it.
Yeah, I'm certainly not averse to it. I think I'm also just recognizing what the select board is about to go into, and I wouldn't want to just go through and say, all right, we as a planning commission, we got this figured out, and then have the rug get pulled out because there was a different thought, or they wanted to take a more measured approach. Mm-hmm. The discussion is good. So either way, I'm happy to have that as a topic. Mm-hmm. And I do think that it all ties together. A lot of these things do. So if it's something, and we should get out of here, but if stormwater with Tom, if he's available and willing to come in,
I will check.
and we can figure out agendas. But I think that commerce and industry south zoning, secondary agriculture ties into that. We could also invite Jamie and Mike and anybody else that's involved with that process to come in and hear what's going on. That could feed their discussions. And for now, the next meeting is the most important thing to figure out, so you can let the rest of it unfold. All right, any other business?
I just had one thing I know I wanted to mention, or maybe two, I wanted to check. So people know that Wendy covers our meetings. Wendy's not covering tonight, she's doing something else, but before Wendy was Eric, and he told me, and Eric is above Wendy, I guess, in the tree at VCAM, but he told me earlier tonight that his meeting with the select board is going to be the last one he does. So I just wanted to recognize Eric's efforts and the stuff that VCAM does, because as we know, since Marianne wasn't able to be here, she does her minutes from the VCAM tape, and if we didn't have people like Eric, we would be sunk. I would be doing the minutes, and they wouldn't be nearly as good.
Yeah,
Anyway,
definitely. Thank you, Eric. Yeah.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, indeed. Good luck with the next chapter. Excellent. And that's a great note to end on. So, a motion to adjourn from anybody?
So
I'll make a motion.
All right. Well, moved by Megan, seconded by Neil. All in favor? Aye.